Welcome back to another mini episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. I'm a men's dating, relationship and intimacy coach. And today I'm going to talk about something that's been coming up a hell of a lot in my work. Actually, I'm really focusing on this, really. It's helping men especially, but this is for men and women, definitely, navigate the anxious avoidant relationships. Because what I'm seeing is I'm getting a lot of men come to me who are in anxious avoidant relationships. They're usually the avoidant ones. Their partners are usually anxious, and they're struggling in some way, whether that is communication, whether that's sex and intimacy, whether that is closeness, or whether it's like commitment and deepening in the relationship, like moving the relationship forward through the stages, from getting to know each other into, moving in, having children and so forth. And why I love doing this is because this is really what I came from. I'm sitting here today in this episode now. My partner Orsa is 8 months pregnant, and there was a time probably, a number of years ago where I would have never been in a committed relationship and be thinking about having kids. I just didn't think it was something that was for me. I believed it was for other people, and that just wasn't possible for me to do because I wasn't built that way. And I've come to realize that's not true. I was just programmed in a certain way unconsciously by the world and my family and the people around me to believe that, closeness was dangerous, fearful of commitment and so forth. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this dynamic of the anxious avoidant and kind of 3 reasons why your relationship, your anxious avoidant relationship isn't working and what you can do about it, right? So let's dive into the anxious side of things first of all, right? So what's something that anxious people do in their relationships? They often are seeking closeness and reassurance from their partner, but they're not verbalizing it very clearly, right? They're doing things to get closeness without saying like, oh, I'd really love us to spend more time together, right? That's something we do, that they do, right? I say we as human beings, we do, right? It might be texting more, it might be reaching out more, it might be touching more and so forth. And what occurs is they're desiring to feel close because there's an underlying feeling of like, oh, if I'm not as close as I want us to be, we're not in communication as we want us to be, then in somehow the relationship is in jeopardy and it's gonna fall apart, right? And obviously closeness is needed, but also there's a way in which A, communicating that, and B, understanding where our partner's at, right, as well. And then there's also the mental reactions that happen when that closeness doesn't happen. The story that anxious people often spin of like, oh my God, they're going to leave. I need to lean in more. I need to pursue them more. Or maybe someone has texted you gone on a date and you said something, and then after the date you're like, oh my God, I said something and maybe they're not going to want to see me again. And you start spinning this story in your mind that creates huge amounts of anxiety, and then you start responding to them as if the story in your mind is the truth. I spoke to someone on Instagram about this recently, what they were dealing with, where they'd said something to someone on a date and they'd assumed that meant that person wouldn't want to see them again, and they were reacting and talking to me from the standpoint of what they believed was true without any evidence from the other person it being actually true, right? So we get into our story. And how does these 2 things really hurt our relationship? So this desire for closeness and this constant leaning for closeness can leave people who are avoidant feeling smothered and can leave them feeling almost quite pressured, right, into the relationship. It can be simply, them feeling overwhelmed and pressured, and leading to them wanting more space, right? And I talk about this from personal experience. And then when they lean out, that means the anxious person's like, oh shit, they're going to leave me. They don't want to be with me. Maybe not consciously, but there's an unconscious emotional feeling to this, like the anxiety that's triggered. And then that can lead to the anxious person leaning, getting angry and creating conflict. And that conflict is often created from a very dysfunctional place of, if I create conflict, then they have to come close to me. If I create some sort of disturbance, then they're going to have to come close to me, right? And this causes a lot of pain in a relationship. So there's a couple of things there, right, that anxious people do in relationship that can cause a lot of disharmony, and also this need for reassurance as well, wanting reassurance, but maybe not being able to verbalize that they're seeking reassurance. Looking for compliments and stuff like that can be a prime example, or just generally get anxious about things, yeah? So what does the avoidant person do in a relationship that causes problems? Leaning out, yeah? Leaning out. This is a big one. It's like as things start to get deeper and they start to get closer and it's like, oh, this relationship is blossoming into something, the avoidant person starts to lean out because they start to fear for their loss of freedom, or they start to worry that they're not going to be able to be so self-reliant and they're going to have to be reliant on someone else. There's that fear of reliance comes up a lot in many different forms, right? it comes up. Or maybe for the avoidant person, the fear comes up of like, oh, if I'm too emotionally or sexually intimate with this person, then I'm going to lose myself. They won't not consciously feel that. What they'll consciously feel is like, oh, I don't want to, overwhelm this person with my feelings and emotions, or tell them too much about me, because if they know too much about me, they may not like who I am, right? There's that kind of self-esteem and confidence piece here, right? And how that hurts the relationship is it causes the leaning out. It causes the anxious partner to feel neglected, unloved, insecure, and their needs not being met. Right? These multiple things, right? And what happens also is that this lack of emotional intimacy or sexual intimacy that I talked about as well erodes trust in the relationship and leaves the anxious partner feeling increasingly insecure and the avoidant person feeling increasingly trapped. And then as the anxious person feels more insecure, they'll lean forward wanting more connection. And as the avoidant person feels trapped, they'll lean out more. And we get into this dynamic of like push and pull that occurs, right? And this is the thing that we have to be really mindful, because this dynamic can play out on the large, like it can play out on really big issues. It can play out in tiny little moments of you sitting on the sofa and one of you wants to hold hands on the sofa and the other one doesn't. And in that moment, that leaning out, the one that doesn't, usually the avoidant partner, they want to feel, I want to feel free. I want to feel like I can move my body as much as I want to in this moment. And the anxious person wants to feel close. And then the anxious person feels maybe rejected or that, insecure about the relationship or feeling like they've done something wrong in that moment. And then the avoidant person's frustrated because they feel like they've been trapped. The anxious person feels like they're frustrated because they've been rejected, and that sparks a little bit of disconnection in the relationship. And you see how this can play out. Like I said, small little moments, right? Small little looks of eye contact either. I've done this and I've seen this with my clients as well, where they make eye contact with their partner and they look away, and that's the way that they exercise freedom, the avoidant partner, because they're even scared of the intimacy, the closeness, the emotional intimacy that gets generated with eye contact, because it is one of those bridges to depth and connection. Now, this is just a little bit, right? I've got a whole load of podcasts about the anxious avoidant dynamic. Me and my partner also have done one or two together. We have a whole podcast together as well. Out there that you can find by the two of us. You just search our names on whatever good podcast place you're at. For some reason, the name of the podcast has completely escaped me because we haven't added to it for a while, but there's a lovely journey in that podcast actually taking you from creating a relationship, finding a relationship, creating a relationship, maintaining a relationship. We kind of a 9-episode there. That's a little segue. So what can you do? The first thing is you start to listen and pay attention and be aware. Now, those are all multiple different things. So if the first thing is awareness, having awareness of your own pattern. If you're listening to this, the chances are you have some awareness. You may not have total awareness, right? You never will have total awareness, but you may not have enough awareness to stop the pattern. Because if you have enough awareness that you know it's happening, but there's still areas, you have your blind spots, you don't see where your pattern is playing out, that may be hurting your relationship more. Because when you're aware of something, you can now have the power to change it, right? The second piece is you also have to be aware of your partner's patterns and observing those very neutrally, right? When we say patterns, it's not like you're going to war with them. It's actually, you almost want to treat them like you would a small child, a 4 or 5-year-old child, right? Or maybe even younger than that. Because these are these things that get built into you from that sort of age, and the way you're going to respond and act is almost quite childish, and actually treat yourself with compassion that you would for a small child. So understanding your partner's pattern and having compassion for them. Because often what we do, we don't have compassion. We're like, oh, you're needy. I hate it when you're needy. We get angry. Or, oh my God, you lean out. I hate when you lean out. It makes me feel so angry. I'm so angry at you. You're so mean and cruel. But actually, if we looked at a small child, we'd be like, oh, in this moment, you're feeling a little bit trapped and you're leaning out. That's okay. I understand. Cool. What I'd really love is da-da-da or whatever, right? Because when we bring something to someone in a nice, compassionate, understanding, soft, gentle, digestible way, people are far more likely to respond to us in a way that they want a connection. So you understand your patterns, or you've got more understanding of yours. You've got more understanding of your partners. The next thing you have to really do is start to communicate better between the two of you, right? And this is a huge piece, this communication piece. Like this is, you could spend years on this communication, because it's things like boundaries. So for an avoidant partner, it might be to say, hey, This weekend I'm going to just like spend some time on my own, because I really feel like I need to nourish myself, and just spend some time alone, and I'll call you on Sunday evening. And that's just, setting some expectations and boundaries there. And the anxious person will be like, oh, thanks for telling me that. Actually, that makes me feel kind of nervous. But, I can self-soothe, or I can be okay with that, because, I can rely on you to, show up on that Sunday night for a call. And then that's another thing, is being your word. Like being your word to the things you say you're going to do with your partner. Like simply that, in the example I just gave there, doing that phone call on the Sunday evening, right? Because you said you would, right? Will just ease your partners, especially your anxious partner's nervous system, because they'll be like, I can trust they're going to be their word. And it actually means the more you do that as an avoidant man, the more you are your word and you're trustable, that's going to sound very strange, the more likely or the easier it is that when you aren't your word, it will be received well, right? As like an anomaly. Like I say in my own relationship, or some of the relationships of my clients, if, for example, use intimacy as an example here, if you are the avoidant partner and you haven't been leaning into intimacy for most of the relationship, you've been leaning away, you've been avoiding it, when you then do start doing that on a regular basis, like initiating sex and intimacy, initiating conversations about sex and intimacy, bringing playfulness and fun to your sex life, in the times when you don't do that, right, your partner's not going to be angry. They can be like, oh, cool, they just didn't do it this time, I can do it. You create this level of goodwill, or what you could call trust, right? So building trust by being your word, communicating openly and honestly with each other goes such a long way. Listening to each other from a place of compassion, understanding, and as well as some other future things that you have to do to come together as well, which I don't have time to go into today, but I do have something for you that will help you do that. Me and also running a workshop. It's on Tuesday night, so it's on the 7th, so it's very soon, on the 7th of May, which is called Making Anxious Avoidant Relationship Work. And it's a 2-hour workshop masterclass that we're going to be running, and really talking about how to do that. So if you listen to this and it's before Tuesday, then wonderful, you got this masterclass to listen, come to. And we've got a good number of people already signed up, actually, because I looked at the stats a couple of days ago. So we're going to really take you through why our attachment styles get created like this, why anxious avoidant couples attract each other, how you can start to break the patterns in your relationship, how you can start to create a future that's beautiful together as well. Yeah. And there's going to be some other tools that you can take away, but it's going to really get into the nitty gritty of it, because this is what we do. Also spends all the time working with anxious women pretty much, and I spend most of my time working with avoidant men. So the tickets are in the show notes if you want to get that. If you're an avoidant man, you listen to this. Something I'm cooking up at the moment is actually a whole program for avoidant men, and helping them kind of break the chains that hold them back in relationship, dating, and intimacy. So I haven't formulated the whole thing, but if you're interested in this, then there's going to be a waiting list that's contained in this episode, so you can add your name to that to find out more about that episode, right? About that program, which is probably going to be anything from kind of 3 months to 4 months, and really take you a deep dive into your attachment style, into avoidance, understanding where it's come from, starting to let go of it, and taking the actions in your life and start doing the healing work with yourself, so that you can start to build relationships that are different, that are healthier, that are more secure. And it won't matter if you're single and in a relationship, everything's going to work perfectly for both, because your avoidance doesn't just show up in your relationship, it shows up in your greater life in general, in the way that you seek support and don't seek support. You express your emotions to friends and family and so forth. So we're going to go through all that kind of stuff, as well as sexual intimacy, masculinity, and the whole lot. And there'll be some wonderful men on there, because I've already started to talk to a few guys and they're very, very interested in this. But I'm going to stop there, because you're going to go and sign up to Making Anxious Avoidant Relationship Work. And I'm going to get on with my Sunday. But until next time you listen to this, next time you tune into the podcast, I say ciao, ciao.